Mia, Rachel, and Roy, all three of them sat there with their hands behind their backs while Danny Halfon stomped back and forth in front of the fire. Not only had he failed to take me into custody, Peter was now loose in the woods somewhere. "What about this mine shaft? Could he have gone there?" asked Halfon. "What mine shaft is that?" replied Mia. Halfon's glare hardened. "Who are you?" he wanted to know. "My name is Mia Weisberg, Dr. Weisberg. And I suppose you're part of this great migration of Canadians?" "As a matter of fact, yes," said Mia. She told him she was on a fishing expedition and had receipts from Walmart to prove it. "Don't waste my time," he said, shifting his attention back to the woods. "Sokoloff!" he shouted. Contemptuously, Halfon pointed out that this little fishing expedition had seriously compromised Israel's political fortunes. And when he said the word Israel, Roy Brooks twitched. Another small mystery had just been revealed. "It's absolutely ridiculous that I'm even here," Halfon said. "All because of you." "Hey," Mia told him, "it's a free country." "Not to you, it's not. They don't take kindly here to foreigners running intelligence operations on U.S. soil." This entire affair had gone quite disastrously for Danny Halfon. He faced the utterly disheartening prospect of becoming a politically tainted commodity, just like me. He was about to be sulfurized. "You're from DEA, right?" "Yes," said Roy. "Why have they got you involved in this?" He turned to Mia. "What are you doing? He's a duly authorized agent of the U.S. government." "Finally," replied Roy. "I assure you, my country had nothing to do with this," said Halfon. "I apologize." Roy told him if he were really sorry, he would take off the belt. Halfon led Roy a short distance away from the others, where he proceeded to unhitch the belt. You have no idea how good that feels," Roy replied. "What I'm about to tell you is confidential," said Halfon. "I am attached to the Israeli embassy in Washington." "And the others?" asked Roy, rubbing his wrists. Halfon explained that Mia, Rachel, and Peter were from Israel, but didn't represent anyone except themselves. "I'm not even sure why they're here. I was sent to jump on the grenade, because nothing must be allowed to come between our two governments, right?" "There's something you ought to know, Mr. Halfon. I am upset," said Roy, turning his head away, acting hurt. "Very, very upset." "I understand." "And somebody is going to hear about this," Roy continued. "But remember, they were acting on their own," said Halfon. "I stepped in, and I got you out of this." "But what about the lost time? Who pays for that?" Roy wanted to know. "What can I say?" replied Halfon. "I'm doing the best I can. Okay?" "Okay," said Roy, but he was still pouting. Halfon asked, "How did Sofer treat you, Avi Sofer? He was, technically speaking, the one who kidnapped you, right? When did he leave?" Roy told him that I had departed camp earlier that morning. He didn't know where I was going. "Can you tell me anything else?" Halfon asked. "What is all this about, anyway?" Roy told him that the biggest news was that they had found evidence of grave robbery and a possibility that the remains of John Kennedy had been taken from Arlington National Cemetery. "I've been working on this for 3 months," Roy told him, "and I was close to solving it when your people jumped me." "Please," Halfon said, "they're not my people." "Well, they're somebody's people," said Roy. "Was there ever any mention of the Absalom cave-in? Halfon wanted to know. That's the pretext for all of this. Roy told him there had been some talk about King David and the lab being in a mine shaft nearby. Is that where Peter Sokoloff went? Halfon asked. I have no idea. Halfon wanted to know if there might be someone at DEA they could talk to, someone who might take custody of the two women. Roy told him no, explaining that it was because he was in Red River, undercover. Said Halfon. My problem is I don't have a lot of time. Roy asked him, so what are you going to do? Halfon pointed to the solitary set of footprints, Peter's footprints, disappearing into the woods. First of all, I've got to find him. As the shadows lengthened, Halfon set off into the woods alone, following a path that looped wildly through the trees before abruptly changing directions down a logging trail. Peter! He called out. You can't hide. Look down. I'm following your trail. I'll find you again, just like before. In the canyons, in the places where the trees were grown close together, the shadows turned into night. Eyes, Peter. Look around you. Eyes everywhere. They're watching you. They've never had a Russian before. I think maybe all the American grizzly bears in these woods are very, very happy to see you. Halfon yelled the most frightening things. Mostly he carried on with menace and no small amount of glee about the feeding habits of bears, how they attacked you, how they dragged you by the head through the snow, how they tore off arms and legs from their victims, how they ripped you open, how they stuck their cold black noses into your guts, eating you until you were hollow. And what they don't finish, Peter, they bury. Is that what you want? The trail led into a basin, then up the other side. Halfon continued to call out for Peter. As he made his way, he then heard something just beyond the rim, tree limbs being whisked aside. There was something big on the other side. Peter, called Halfon, I hear you. When he said this, the movement stopped. Peter, it's Danny. He took another step up, but that's when he heard the first growl. Halfon assumed it was only Peter, trying to frighten him. But the snarl came again from deeper down in the throat, more like an animal. It's not working, Halfon told him, taking another uncertain step. He was nearing the top, almost to the point where he could see the denizen on the other side, when the growl came again. I'm coming over, he said as he released the safety on the Beretta. This is your last chance. The growl exploded in furious anger, and the unseen creature seemed to be prepared to hold its ground. Not the sort of behavior you would expect from a coward like Peter Sokoloff. Halfon took a last step forward, a tentative step, and then he took 2 steps back, and when he did, his foot slipped. He lost his balance and tumbled all the way back down, head over heels. At the bottom, he had scarcely stopped rolling when he was back up on his feet and running full speed back down the trail the way he had come. He circled through the hills, around the trees, and he rushed into camp with such suddenness. A startled Rachel Levy fell off the log where she had been sitting. What happened? Asked Roy, who'd been standing guard over his one-time captors. Nothing, said Halfon. But you're running like someone's chasing you. By now, Halfon was bent over, his hands on his knees. He was trying to catch his breath. Does anybody know? Do bears hibernate? I can't remember. Mia told him, of course bears hibernate. Is it possible to wake one up accidentally because I think that's what I did." "You're being chased by a bear?" asked Mia. "I don't know for sure, but I think." All eyes turned to the woods. It was cold. No one slept well. Everyone was jumpy. Then, just after dawn, Halfon slapped the Beretta against the canvas. "Everyone up," he said. "We're out of here." "What about the tent?" asked Mia. "And the other stuff, the graphite rods?" "Leave it," he said. "Leave it? Are you serious? Do you have any idea how much these things cost? Do you know what I paid for this tent? And it's defective. I want my money back." "Shut up," said Halfon. "I am not leaving the equipment," Mia told him. "You will leave it if I tell you. And if you know where Sofer is, and you haven't told me, I'm going to see that the prosecutor charges you with the maximum, Miss Weisberg. I don't want to hear any more out of you." As night turned to morning, the four of them headed down the mountain, away from what had been the third campsite. Mia and Rachel were in the lead. Halfon followed, waving the Beretta, and Roy, the man with extremely confused allegiances at the moment, brought up the rear. He was finally free, but he was worried about what was going to happen next to Rachel and Mia and Peter. Rachel wanted an answer to that question as well. Halfon replied that he would probably turn them over to the Americans. "I'll tell them you're spies, and to throw away the key." "Ignore him. He's only trying to scare us," said Mia. "Oh, is that what you think? This is all a bluff?" "Yeah," Mia replied, "because if we're spies, what does that make you?" "I've got diplomatic status," Halfon replied. "Oh, right," Mia said. "And the Americans know you're out here working on an investigation? You can't turn us in, and you know it." "Just watch me," said Halfon. "We may just let DEA take over. Isn't that right, Roy? That way, I don't have to be involved at all." The women stopped suddenly. "What are you doing?" shouted Halfon, who thought they were only being defiant. But then he saw why. Peter Sokolov was standing atop the next ridge. The Russian was stripped to his waist, with his arms folded across his bare chest. "Sokolov!" Peter snorted and made a low, threatening growl. Exactly the sound Halfon had heard the previous evening. "It was you," he said. It took Rachel and Mia a split second to figure it out. As Peter continued growling, it struck Rachel as terribly funny. Peter had been playing a bear in the woods. Both women laughed uncontrollably. "Is that your bear?" Mia said, almost choking. "Would you shut up?" Their laughter sent Halfon into rage. He said if they ever got back to Israel, he would make sure that Peter got deported back to Russia. Most of these threats were empty, of course, but Peter couldn't have known that. His only response was to growl even louder at his tormentor. Then, without warning, he rushed full speed down the hill, heading straight for Halfon. Not only was he without shirt or coat, everyone now realized Peter wasn't wearing shoes either. Halfon ordered him to stop as Peter closed to within 5 meters, but he was still roaring like an absolutely wild man. "Don't say I didn't warn you," Halfon threatened as he took aim. Suddenly there was movement from behind. Blurred movement. Without warning, the massive form of Roy Brooks appeared, chopping across Halfon's wrist with a clenched fist. The blow sent the pistol flying. Halfon was so shocked that Roy would even do such a thing, he momentarily forgot about Peter, whose feet had just left the ground, in a little something he had been practicing for years, a move known as the flying mare. He missed Halfon's chest by 1/2 meter, but as he passed through the air, his extended arm caught Halfon high on the neck. The blow knocked him flat. Both men lay on the ground, head to head, with their feet sprawled in opposite directions. Halfon was enraged. He jumped up, screaming, "You broke my neck!" Peter sat up too, his eyes blinking. Mia thought she noticed a trace of embarrassment in his expression, like someone awakening from a dream. Halfon stomped and raged. As he screamed abuse, Peter's eyes narrowed, and he started snarling at Halfon again. "You want something to growl at," shouted Halfon. "I'll give you something." He rushed around behind Peter and grabbed him with a forearm across the throat. Then, with his left hand, he slapped Peter about the face. It stopped the growling temporarily. Halfon then doubled up his fist and cracked Peter across the back of the head. Though dazed by the force of the blow, Peter struggled to his feet. Now it was Halfon who was in trouble. He was dangling from Peter's back like a child. Halfon squeezed Peter's neck harder, tightening the chokehold until the Russian was on the verge of blanking out. Peter wobbled and stumbled and gasped for air. Just before losing consciousness, he spun around and half fell, half drove himself into a nearby tree. He smashed Halfon into the trunk a second and third time. Halfon slowly released and dropped to the ground. Rachel watched it all in anguish. The women screamed for them to stop, and when Halfon crumpled into the snow, it seemed to be over. Roy rushed over and cut the plastic straps from the women's wrists as Peter went over to the half-conscious man. Speaking to him first in Russian and then repeating himself in Hebrew, he demanded to know why Halfon had been so insulting. "Am I not supposed to feel the things you say to me?" Halfon looked up at him and smiled, and then, in a single movement, he kicked Peter's left knee, hyperextending it. Peter screamed and fell backwards, stunned by the pain shooting up his leg. Mia grabbed the pistol as the two men locked together again. Halfon punched Peter squarely in the nose. Then with a quick left, he smashed him across the chin. These blows knocked Peter backwards. He staggered and then sat in the snow, dazed. "Give me the gun," said Halfon when he noticed that Mia had it. "No, you stay where you are." "Never point," he told her, "if you don't have the nerve to use it." He walked toward her, his palm extended. He said he doubted if she even knew how to take it off safety, which was true. But it didn't matter. Roy Brooks broke it up by jumping into the space between Mia and Danny Halfon. "This has gone far enough," he said. "What are you doing, Roy? I thought you were my friend. We're supposed to be on the same side. I trusted you." He extended an open palm to Roy, and then smoothly kneed the American in the groin, doubling Roy over. 3 quick steps back and a second kick across the shoulder knocked Roy completely out of the way. But Halfon had just made a serious mistake. He had taken his eyes off Peter. As the American rolled in the snow, groaning, Peter launched. And this time, this flying mare connected. Halfon exploded forward into Mia, both of them sprawling to the ground. Casually, but still growling, the wild-eyed Peter Sokolov scooped up the stunned man, hoisted him above his shoulders, and started spinning like a windmill. At maximum velocity, he released. Halfon's body flew backwards through the air. When he came down, his head cracked across the rocks, with an impact that was both singular and sharp, and deathly. Mia, who was still on the ground, quickly crawled to the stricken man. Blood poured from his ears like a hydrant. A clotted chunk of something passed between his lips as his eyes faded and closed. Peter watched, unbelieving. His rage vanished in an instant. He dropped to his knees in the pool from Halfon's ears and nose. He demanded that someone do something. But Mia knew the signs. She had seen the impact, heard the impact. Halfon's skull had sustained a massive basal fracture. She could tell this without even having seen an X-ray. A strangling was heard deep in Halfon's chest. A dark, horrible clattering followed by convulsions. Halfon stiffened, then with eyes opening wide, he suddenly relaxed. "Danny! Danny!" cried Peter. "Can you hear me?" They tried to distract him, to lead him away, but Peter refused to budge. He kept trying to cradle Danny Halfon's head in his lap. Gently, Mia pushed him back. Speaking softly, she kept repeating that it was okay. "But he's not dead," Peter sobbed. "He's just unconscious." Peter's hands and chest were stained the same color as the melted, clotted snow that formed a halo around the lifeless face. Mia checked for a pulse. She placed an ear to Halfon's chest, but heard only dull silence. Roy collapsed to a sitting position in the snow as Peter looked from face to face, seeking someone to agree with him. "He isn't dead, he's only knocked out." There was a period of lost time when Danny Halfon died. Peter disconnected from everyone. He sat beside the body, rocking back and forth. Rachel ran off into the woods, where she stayed for a long time, and Roy Brooks, sat alone, praying. When Mia recovered her wits, she realized that Peter could also die of pneumonia or go into shock. He was sitting there in the cold without shirt or shoes or socks. She ordered the other two to find the clothes, and they did, the next ridge over. The three of them dressed the disoriented man as if he were a child. Afterwards, they sat together, speaking barely above a whisper. Rachel said that everything seemed so trivial now. She wondered how it could be possible to hate someone one minute, only to love them in death the next. Mia looked down at her watch. It was nearly 8 a.m. in the morning. "Where's the radio?" she asked. "I guess it's back in camp," Roy replied. "We've got 11 minutes. Avi may be trying to contact us. Roy, go get it, quick." Roy Brooks jumped to his feet and headed back in the direction of the camp. When he returned, he brought not only the radio, but one of the sleeping bags as well. They unzipped it and spread it over Peter's shoulders, but he tossed it off. They tried this several times, but he stubbornly refused. Finally, they draped the bag across the lifeless body of Danny Halfon, and the three of them sat and listened anxiously for my voice on the radio, which didn't come. "Now what?" Rachel wanted to know. "Roy, are you absolutely positive we can't call your people back in Phoenix?" "No," said Roy. "It's not an option." "But it doesn't make sense," Mia told him. "We've got to get in touch with someone." Roy told her, "There are things I simply can't tell you about my job, or I'd lose it." "Well, that does it then," said Mia. "Unless someone has something, I'm out of ideas here." After this, they sat there, each considering the difficult question of what to do next. In that she was a doctor, Mia said it was her responsibility to go to town and return with the authorities. "Mia, do you know what happens if you do that?" asked Rachel. "Well, I don't like the idea either, but unless you have another suggestion, we can't just sit here. We're in the middle of nowhere in a foreign country with a dead body." "What if Mr. Sofer worked something out?" said the ever-hopeful Rachel. "We've got to give him a little more time." Mia's reply was simple. "We can't. Someone is going to see the cars on the road, and then what?" "Roy, are you sure there's nothing you can do?" Roy shook his head no. "Oh, please wait just a little longer," said Rachel. "Maybe something will happen." But Rachel, by law, the Americans will expect us to have made a clear and reasonable effort to contact the authorities. Another 30 minutes passed, during which they discussed all the things that would inevitably happen once the investigation into Danny Halfon's death began. Each agreed that one outcome was inevitable. They would be immersed in a swell of legal activity, depositions, questions, lawyers, politics. These weren't prospects they relished, Roy in particular. No one else knew his true legal predicament, but Roy faced hard prison time. As the specter of extrapolated international legal process filtered into the discussion, Roy brought up the subject of the lab again. "Someone should at least go up to the mine and look around," he said. "This may be the last chance for any of us." "Who cares?" said Rachel, running her hand through her hair. "As far as I'm concerned, this thing is over. I want to go home." "I do too," said Roy, "but look at the price we've paid to get here. All of us." Rachel put her hands over her eyes and repeated that she just wanted for it all to be over. "I really don't care anymore," she said. Roy Brooks replied, "I don't believe that for a second. You wanted David as bad as I wanted John Kennedy. There ought to be something positive out of this. What are we talking about, 30 minutes? An hour? If we don't find the lab in the mine, at least we tried." Roy then asked Mia what she thought. "You might find this hard to believe," she replied, "but I actually agree. Someone ought to go up and check it out, but I don't think we've got much time. On the other hand, what's an hour at this point?" On the drive from Albuquerque to Red River, Julian Lockery and I were invited to ride in the lead car with FBI agent J.T. Newlin, a large man with a full head of gray-black hair, beefy hands, and a deep, raspy voice. Strung out along the highway behind us was a caravan of Suburbans and Fords, 15 in all, including an unmarked forensics van. Newlin was anxious to know what he was up against. While the convoy sped north, Julian and I told him everything we knew, each from our own perspective. Newlin methodically took down everything in a legal pad and turned especially grave when I told him that the lodge had been booby-trapped. "You know that for a fact?" "Well, Mr. Brooks is the one who told me, actually, and I saw a vault in the basement. I think that's where they keep the remains, and it was definitely armed." At this point, Julian interrupted and said if Roy were the source for that information, it definitely was a maybe. Newlin wanted as thorough a description of the lodge as I could provide. How long it was, how tall, how were the rooms arranged. As I attempted to recall exact details, he sketched out a floor plan, constantly pressing me for accuracy. It wasn't easy. I thought in meters. He didn't. "This wall is where the photographs are," I said, "the LAs. I was pointing to a line he had just drawn. "I don't think I understand LAs, said Newlin. "These are the people they've brought back to life," I told him. "They've got human remains and they've brought them back to life?" "No, not life itself. I mean, not life the way we think of it. Life inside a computer." "I still don't get it," said Newlin. "So it's not really a person, but it looks like one?" "Yes, it is, and it isn't. They are extracting memories from the dead," I told him, "and building these LAs around them." "How do they do that?" he wondered. I replied that I didn't know either, and that was the reason we would have to be careful when we got to the lodge. We don't want to accidentally break something when we go in. We've got computer people, he told me, and I think he meant computer specialists, back in the caravan somewhere. Only authorized agents go near the computers. I had not had an in-depth conversation with anyone at our embassy, but I tried to conduct myself as Ehud or even Danny Halfon might have done in a similar situation. In other words, I tried to think like a winner for a change. With the Americans, I was assertive, demanding. I made claims. Specifically, I let Newland know that we expected David, Absalom, and the technology to be returned to Israel. Swing for the fences, as they say. I'd also been careful to keep my identity secret. I remained Fauzi al-Naji, a man who would definitely be up to his nose in fertilizer if his real name ever became known to the unsuspecting Americans. I was starting to feel an adolescent delirium building, a sense of indestructibility. Maybe that had been my problem for the last 35 years. I'd lost the simple impulses of mindless adolescence. I overthought everything. The young simply don't realize they can die. That's the mixed blessing of youth, I guess. The explanation for bold courage in the young. It's mindless. Newland asked me 1,000 questions, but after a couple of hours, both Lockery and I had pretty much run out of new things to say. He gradually tuned us out and started drawing up a game plan for when we arrived at the lodge. For the first time, Julian Lockery and I had a chance to talk, just the two of us. As we pulled into the outskirts of Red River, he told me of the amazing rooftop exploits of ex-DEA file clerk Roy Brooks. I reported to him that the last time I had seen Roy, he was tied up and extremely uncomfortable. "Oh, really?" said Julian. "I hope you're not just saying that to make me feel better." Mia transferred the map from the back of the receipt to a blank piece of paper. As she sketched it out, she explained what she had seen at the entrance to the mine and warned them of the powerful odor. "Take 2 R3 flashlights and the gun. Take the gun. And my camera, too," she said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small plastic camera she had purchased at Walmart. "It's got 12 shots," she told Roy. As he stuffed it into his coat, Rachel unexpectedly spoke up. She had been standing in the background until now. She suddenly decided she wanted to go too. "But I thought you said—" "No, I changed my mind," replied Rachel. Obviously, Rachel didn't know what she wanted, but she realized if Roy found the lab, she would be forever sorry that she hadn't gone along. After a lot of internal debate, after a lot of back and forth, she just closed her eyes and announced that this was something she definitely had to do. Rachel and Roy Brooks headed up the banks of the stream into the direction of the mine shaft. "And I want those flashlights back," Mia called. They hiked most of the way in silence. The woods were quiet. When at last they spotted the entrance to the mine looming through the trees, Rachel experienced another reversal. "Do I want to do this?" she whispered. "I don't know," said Roy. He ignored her hesitation, shuffling forward, stepping around the boxes and barrels. Then the smell of death reached his nose. Behind him, Rachel was already gagging. "I'm going to vomit," she said. She held her hand to her mouth and heaved a couple of times, but nothing came up. "You don't have to go in," Roy told her. "Let me find out what it is. Then we can decide what we're going to do at that point." With a flashlight in one hand, Danny Halfon's Beretta in the other, Roy moved into the tunnel. He breathed through his mouth as the stench became even more unbearable. He stepped around more boxes, then pushed aside a shipping drum filled with old-fashioned vacuum tubes. He just picked one up and was examining it when he heard Rachel enter the mine. He turned, surprised to see the beam of her flashlight bouncing toward him. "I thought you were going to wait outside." "Go," she said, pushing him forward. As they made their way deeper into the mine, the odor was even more intense. Eventually, they came to a place littered with debris. There were boxes, more trash barrels filled with computer magazines and old software manuals. As Rachel held the light, Roy had to roll one of the barrels aside so they could get through. A few steps later, they came to a wall spanning the entire passage. In its face was a large metal door. The hyper-sweet, retching odor seemed to be coming from the other side. Roy pushed the handle. "Something's blocking it," he said. He pushed again. The gap widened, but not by much. "Help me," he said to Rachel. Together, they rammed the door as hard as they could, and this time it popped open, accompanied by a sickly crunch. Roy poked his head into the resulting gap to see what was blocking on the other side. "What is it?" she asked. Roy looked at her. "It's Connor Borman White," he said. When we arrived at the lodge, it was fascinating to watch the FBI shift gears. Newland was the consummate field commander. On the way in, he had written out his strategy on a yellow tablet, distilling everything we'd said into a half-page of bullets and stars and underlined phrases. But when he stepped out of the vehicle, he left the notes on the front seat. I stood off to the side as he gathered everyone around, telling them what they would do. I suspected he was reciting, word for word, the things that he had written, but it didn't come off that way. His words carried authority, and he spoke them as if they had just occurred to him, the natural outcome of some high process of logic. Everyone else seemed to be impressed. I know I was. He decreed, under no circumstance was anyone to force a door or a window, even if it seemed to be open already. He then proceeded to make assignments, and explained that the lodge might be booby-trapped and dangerous. Agents Schultz and Rankin, the explosives experts, would lead the way, making sure that all was safe before anyone went in. As Newland was going through the particulars, a call came through on the car phone. Our driver motioned me over. "It's for you," he said. He handed over the receiver. I climbed into the front seat and closed the door. It was from Tel Aviv. It was Ehud. "Najee, can you hear me?" the voice on the other end of the line asked. I told him he was coming through loud and clear. "Najee?" "Yes," I said. "Are you there?" "Yes, Ehud, I hear you." "Najee, can you hear?" By now I realized what was going on. He was reminding me that our conversation was being monitored. "I hear you, Ehud. Can you hear me?" "Now I can," he replied. I told him we were getting ready to go inside the lodge, and the Americans seemed to have a good team in place, pandering to any eavesdroppers who might be listening. "You received the materials I sent?" he asked. "Yes, it was very useful." "Good. I just wanted to make sure." "Ehud, I told the Americans we wanted David returned to Israel along with the technology these guys stole from us." A momentary silence followed as Ehud interpreted my comment. "Good," he said finally. "I'll start the process at this end. Very good. Any contact with Danny Halfon?" I told him no. "Some of us are getting a little worried about him," said Ehud. "Tell him to call home. And what about your people? Have you been able to reestablish contact?" I looked at my watch. It was a little before 11 a.m. New Mexico time. "I'm not scheduled to contact them for another hour or so," I replied, "but I don't think they're that far away." "What are your plans, Najee? When will you leave New Mexico? I hope you'll stop by the embassy in Washington." "Any particular reason?" I asked. "No, they just always like it when Al-Najee drops in," he replied. "Oh, I'm flattered," I said. By this he was telling me the personnel at the embassy were aware of my delicate situation and were guarding my identity, which was good news and a little surprising. Agents Schultz and Rankin headed for the lodge, just the two of them. Schultz was a tall man, lank and wiry. In his hands he carried an object roughly the size of a shoebox. Attached to one end was a plastic tube fitted with some kind of wand-like sensor. When they reached the deck, Schultz powered up the device and handed it over to Rankin, who was a pudgy fellow with a kindly face. Exercising great caution, Schultz passed the wand along the edge of the door, careful not to touch it in any way. Rankin monitored the display on the box. Once, during the process, he pointed to the door handle and Schultz passed the wand back over, rechecking something. When they were finished, he handed the wand to Rankin, who stepped off the deck and came back out to the cars where we were. Schultz knocked on the door and called out FBI. When there was no response, he leaned toward the window and peeked in. He was very careful not to make contact with the frame. After that, he too walked back to where Newland and the rest of us were standing. He reported there definitely seemed to be some kind of security system in place. "Any way to tell if it's explosive?" asked Newland. Schultz said no. "What do you suggest?" Schultz said that the most efficient method would be to cut a hole through the roof, moving through the lodge from top to bottom. If they could locate the device, they could probably deactivate it. "How long will that take?" Newland wanted to know. 10 minutes, 15 worst case. "What about the roof? Any risk there?" Rankin replied that there was always a risk, but it was highly unlikely that someone would go to the trouble of booby-trapping a roof. The portable saw whined. Sawdust sprayed high into the air. Rankin was at the top of the ladder, cutting an opening into the steeply pitched roof. As a precaution, he had secured the portion to be cut out with a stapled wire brace so it wouldn't fall through when the cut was completed. I couldn't help but admire the efficiency. When the hole was finished, they pulled away the sandwich of shingles and decking in one piece, letting it hang down the side of the roof. Using a small sledgehammer then, Rankin drove 2 massive spikes down the center beam. In less than a minute, both men rappelled through the hole into the lodge. Once they were inside, there was a noticeable increase of tension among the rest of the company. We were fully 30 meters from the lodge, but at this point, everyone got behind the vehicles, fearing the worst. Down in the mine, Roy squeezed through the doorway first. Rachel followed, holding her nose. Borman White's body was stuck to the floor in a hard, dark pool of blood. The back of his skull had been blown away. Blood, matter, and dark tissue sealed what remained of it to the door. For a moment, they just stared at the corpse. It was an image neither would ever forget. It was gross and distorted. "And what's that?" Rachel asked, pointing to something sticking out from under the man's hip. Roy pushed back Connor Borman White's blood-stiff shirt. It was the Glock. It was wretched. The pistol was covered in blood. The front door to the lodge opened. Schultz stepped out and motioned us forward. In an orderly procession, we followed Newland across the front yard, up the steps, and inside. What we saw was pretty much what I remembered from before. There was one surprise, though. The computer room had been completely destroyed. Every single monitor had been shattered, and the computers had been tossed around the room like blocks. As the others gaped at the photographs on the wall, I led Newland to the basement. Rankin and Schultz were already there, already checking out the vault with their magic wand. One of them said it was a pretty sophisticated setup. Somebody doesn't want you to open this door. Meanwhile, Roy and Rachel moved deeper into the mine. At first, the only sounds were those made by their feet, scuffing across the hard surfaces, but suddenly, Roy stopped. "Turn off the light," he ordered. They stood there in the dark, listening. "This had better be a joke," said Rachel. Roy told her to be quiet. Eventually, they switched the flashlights back on and moved a few steps forward, and then she heard it. It was a faint voice drifting through the corridor ahead. "What is it?" she whispered. Roy switched his flashlight off, then reached over and did the same to hers. Again, they listened for a long time, long enough so that both started having second thoughts about this venture. Finally, he leaned over to whisper, and Rachel became upset with him. She didn't want unnecessary conversation drawing attention to their presence, particularly since there might be something waiting in the shadows ahead. Not only did Roy have an urgency to speak, what he said unnerved her. He told her he was sorry. She was startled. Sorry about what? "I haven't been a very good example," he said softly. "Roy? What?" "Well, I'm sorry for a lot of things," he said. "For hitting on you back in Mexico." "Hitting on me? What are you talking about?" she asked. "Well, you know, out at the pool. I was messed up. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I know better." Rachel was completely astonished that his sensibility could be so totally misplaced, almost half-witted. There were more pressing issues at the moment. She couldn't begin to imagine why he would say such a thing. Not now, not under these circumstances. Then Roy bowed his head and started whispering a prayer, asking for protection, forgiveness, telling God he didn't want to die, and please protect him from whatever it was they now faced. Enough was said. Rachel completely freaked out. Roy was making peace with the world, like someone in mortal danger. Rachel flipped on the flashlight and turned to run, but Roy grabbed her. "What are you doing?" "Let me go." "But where are you going?" he asked. "Look," she said. "If it's that bad, it's time to get out. You can stay if you want." "No, Rachel, you've got to come. I need you." He told her the least they could do was see what was ahead. He promised they would proceed with caution, and if anything looked even remotely amiss, they would turn around. "We've come too far, Rachel. You see that light at the end of the shaft? We've got to go see what it is, and then we're through." They eased ahead, cautiously, stepping lightly on the balls of their feet, listening. When they got to the end of the corridor, the only thing they found was a brighter illumination at the end of another corridor. Holding hands, they eased forward. Both were trying to possess the Beretta. "Think David," whispered Roy. "No, think get out of here alive," was Rachel's reply. As they neared the entrance to the main chamber, an almost human murmur echoed through the mine. It was even more distinct than before, and at times it actually sounded like language. A few seconds later, this voice slowly transformed into a hum. It was flat, it was electronic. Roy thought it sounded a little bit like a high-voltage hum. 10 steps later, they entered a vast underground chamber. It took a moment for their eyes to adjust. When they could see, there seemed to be many things lurking in the shadows, Suspended from the ceiling was a grid supporting all sorts of devices, speakers, cone-shaped horns aimed at the floor, along with hundreds of gently pulsing lights, arrayed like stars. Much of the illumination, however, came from the far end of the chamber and a rack containing at least 100 monitors. Close by were 6 huge computers. There were also baffles and half-walls partitioning the cavern into zones, and row upon row of large, shadowy contraptions that were hard to make out from where they stood. "What's that?" she asked, as she aimed her flashlight at one of the frames. There, in the bright circle of light, they saw a human skull, suspended mid-air. With the light, Rachel traced to the rib cage, out to the extended fingers, and then the surrounding metal frame. The bones protruded from the front and back sides of the display and seemed to be embedded in a clear plastic sheet. Roy Brooks realized immediately he was looking at an X-frame for humans. As they proceeded into the chamber, Rachel kept her flashlight aimed at the skull, the grisly landmark presiding over this dark and rancid course. "Something's dead in here," she said. "No kidding." "No, recently dead, I mean. You're probably still, smelling Connor or something." They stumbled over cables, thick and dark, coiled across the floor, then squeezed through racks of equipment until, at last, they reached the frame where they examined the skull and its skeleton up close. The nameplate read, C. Walters. To the left, someone named C. Bonnert. On the right, K. Rader. Unknowns in life, but immortalized in this spectral gallery. "Look at the way it's constructed," Rachel marveled. "One sheet of plastic, vacuum molded to the bones." "You think that's something," said Roy. "Wait until you see this." He located the power switch as he explained. The lights on the rim project what the person looked like when they were alive. He toggled the switch. Nothing. He moved to the adjacent frame and tried again. Still nothing. She went down one aisle as Roy walked the other. Not all the displays contained full skeletal sets, and in a few the remains had been posed. Roy found a child with a hand on its hip, the other above its head as if waving. In another, the skeleton was scratching its head as if pondering a great question. It was a macabre tableau. Roy started to say something about it when Rachel yelled out that she had found him. "You found the president?" asked Roy. "No," she said. "David." He rushed over to where she was. Suspended there, protruding from the frame, David looked like a creature stuck between dimensions. Half his vertebrae were missing. He had only 4 fingers, 3 on the left hand, 1 on the right, and of course the skull. Gapped, fractured, missing most of its teeth, all cast in shades of dark parchment. The king's remains fired Roy's imagination. He contemplated each bone, the rough textured surfaces, the chips and fractures. He couldn't help but think back to childhood, remembering when Mama Jack paid him to memorize the Bible at 50 cents per chapter. Psalms 139 in particular. He remembered David's own words, eerie now, in the presence of these his remains. "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body." All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Roy's eyes beheld that knitting, the splinterings that carried a warrior into legend, the sweet scaffolding across which had been hung a great life, and he experienced an emotional rush. He also felt rekindled determination to find John Kennedy. Without another word, he wheeled around and headed back into the rows, double-checking each nameplate. For Rachel, the long quest was over. She had achieved what our team had set out to do, find David. "You know what?" she called out. "It's really too bad Mr. Sofer couldn't have been here to see this." Roy was busy and didn't respond. "It's so strange how it works," she continued. "Sometimes you get to be part of something when you didn't really care about it one way or the other. While Mr. Sofer, he didn't even get to be here. Roy, can you hear me? I saw a tombstone the other day. It said, 'What I sought I did not find, and what I found I did not seek.' I guess that's the way it is. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't." "Roy, where are you?" "I'm over here," he called, finally, "by the monitors." "What are you doing?" she asked. "I found him," said Roy. "You what?" There was a momentary pause before he told her that he had just found Jeremy Bentham. "It looks like he killed himself," Roy told her. This X-frame had been rotated horizontally, like a table, with Bentham sprawled across it, gun still in his hand. "It's awful," Roy told her. "The blood, it's like a jello mold. It's as if someone's been mounted in—" Roy would have gone into gory detail, but a strange, completely unexpected thing happened as he spoke. A gust of wind passed down the aisle, cool against his cheeks. Borne on this uncommon breeze was the sharp aroma of garlic, all the more extraordinary because there was no point of origin. He stepped face on into the airstream, attempting to follow to its source, and the jet embraced him for a few steps, but when he reached the monitors, just as suddenly as it had begun, the breeze faded, and Roy became frightened. All around were such exotic technologies, on the ceiling, in the shadows, on the main floor. He didn't care how the wind device worked, only that it might be toxic, or the harbinger of something worse. It was while searching for the source he noticed a visor hanging next to the monitors, the device through which he had seen Buffer. But when he reached to remove it from its cradle, the air stirred again, washing across in a strong enough gust to ripple his clothes. "What's going on over there?" Rachel called out. "I don't know. A breeze of some sort." "Did you say breeze?" she asked. Rachel quickly made her way over, but again, as suddenly as it had appeared, the gust faded. "What is happening?" she asked. "Nothing. It's just some kind of strange ventilation." "But I don't feel anything," she said. "I know," Roy replied. "It comes and goes." "Look," said Rachel, "let's do ourselves a big favor. Let's get David and let's get out of here." "But what about the president?" asked Roy. "Have you seen him? I haven't. And I've been down every aisle. Well, have you?" "No," said Roy. "Okay, then. I suggest that we figure out how to take the frame apart. Maybe we can carry it out in sections." "Roy?" At that moment he was in the process of removing the visor from the cradle. As he did, the monitors up and down the line flashed from light blue to black. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Put it back." Roy had just had a strange notion. Could there be someone else in the mine? Someone otherwise invisible? Ignoring Rachel's demands, he slipped the device over his head and buckled the chin strap. It made her furious. "I order you," she said as the visor's field of view flashed across the monitors. "You're doing something to the screens, look." As she was shouting, the breeze reappeared, at first rifling through their clothes like fingers. And there was an additional piercing static pouring into the chamber from all corners of the mine. Surprise at what was happening became horror as the atmosphere turned suddenly oppressive. Before he could remove the device from his head, before he had the chance to utter a single word, Roy and Rachel were forced to their knees, driven down by a decompressing power so overwhelming neither could draw a breath. As he faded, Roy observed an ethereal shape stepping in from the shadows, moving across the visor's screen. It was an image that robbed him of what little breath remained. A few meters away, Jeremy Bentham's grieving L.A. made its way to the table of blood, where it leaned forward, studying the remains of its creator. And then Roy went blank. Wherever he was, whatever state of consciousness he had arrived in, Roy awakened in the darkest place he had ever known, and there seemed to be someone standing beside him. He called out to the being and attempted to turn, but the presence moved away, staying just beyond his seeing. He believed he had arrived at the threshold of death. But when this thought passed into his mind, a voice called to him, a voice not so much heard as felt. Roy then drifted toward consciousness. His eyes blinked, and he recognized his surroundings and felt someone tugging at his leg. Rachel lay beside him on the floor. The atmospheric blast was lifting. Roy sat up, looked over at the table, but the L.A. was no longer there, and he was about to make another astonishing discovery. Bentham's corpse was also gone. All that remained was a silhouette, a body tracing in congealed blood. Rachel struggled to a kneeling position, gasping. She had only just recovered her own breathing rhythm when the mysterious voice, heard earlier in the mine shaft, manifest itself again. Echoing from one end of the chamber to the other, the same unintelligible phrases as before. Roy repositioned the visor before stepping into the darkness. A still-heaving Rachel looked at the monitors where she tracked what Roy was seeing. She observed skulls drifting by atop clear plastic walls, a meandering view of metal rims and dangling cables, and then she saw it. Roy was moving toward an illumination point visible only in the dimension where he now walked. She was spellbound as the light resolved into a hospital bed bounded by a glucose feeder and a nightstand, and lying in the bed was the feeble L.A. of John Kennedy. There were phantoms here. For Roy, this vision was so real, he lifted the visor to make sure there wasn't something actually there, and then he knelt and watched and listened. The booming voice, though unintelligible, was piercing and resonant, rattling everything, even the grid above. The hundreds of small lights there vibrated, some blinked out. A moment later, Bentham's L.A. reappeared in the visor's screen. The phantom made its way from the shadows to the hospital bed and the old man. It was Bentham's L.A. It was his voice ringing throughout the chamber. Roy jumped when a hand touched his shoulder. He turned to see Rachel, whose face and lips were the exact same color, terrified white. "Roy, please, let's go," she said. The Bentham L.A. reacted when she spoke. It looked over, seemingly shocked to see two humans, and the cavern fell into silence. The creature returned to the shadows. "Look what you did," Roy said. Whispering, she told him, "I know you want to find him, but there's nothing to find. Please, before anything else happens, let's get out of here." Roy shook his head. "No." "Okay, but what if Israel agrees to some kind of reward?" she said. "We'll be forever grateful to have David. Oh, come on, please." "Wow," said Roy. He's watching us. Rachel experienced an involuntary shiver. Who? John Kennedy, said Roy. He can hear you. She turned in the direction he was facing. Without a visor, she could only see shadows. Oh, please, she told him, let's get out of here. Before she could finish, the airburst suddenly rematerialized. The gust, with its pungent aroma, seemed to seek them out, growing stronger, pressing through their clothes, reaching all the way to the skin. As the intensity grew, their clothes billowed and popped. It's really weird technology, Roy shouted. He pointed to the gadgets on the ceiling. I think it's coming from there. This manifestation would become a subject of considerable debate in the weeks to come. Was this an engineered event? An atmospheric device of some sort, concocted by Borman White and Bentham? Or was there sentience in the wind? Because it moved, it changed course, but above all else, it behaved as a living thing. As Roy later said, he had no patterns for this, for these beads he was experiencing. The strange gust, the LAs, the killing vacuum in the chamber. It's little wonder that, with no other reasonable option, he reverted to a religious frame of reference. As the pressure continued to drop, first came an extraordinary lightheadedness, followed by suffocation. Roy again drifted to that realm beyond landmark, and he wasn't alone. This time, he traveled into the presence of the ghost L.A., Jeremy Bentham's ghost. They inhabited a common dimension now, with no protective reality between them. The L.A. weaved side to side, engulfing Roy in a furnace of supernatural ranting. Roy felt crushing pain in his head and chest as the creature circled him, shrieking with such penetrating resonance. Roy sensed a melting of his own identity. His faltering heartbeat seemed to be working against him now, dragging him toward some dark shore. Like an exhausted swimmer, hopeless against the undertow, he was no match for the power. Roy tried to open his mouth and scream, but nothing came. The only words were those in his mind, and even there he scarcely had energy or will enough to call them forth. He seemed to know that he was near the end. He had a sense that he was about to be dragged under, and just as he felt himself slipping away, the apparition of John Kennedy appeared. It had a dreamlike quality about it, reminding him of the illogical sequence of dreams. "Can you please help?" Roy asked simply. The old man just looked at him. There were no spoken words, but Roy heard someone inside his head, a voice asking, "Have you finished?" "I don't know," Roy answered in thought. "Are you finished?" It came again. Roy couldn't answer, and he became quite emotional. Still, the question rang again, a second and third time. "No, I'm not finished," he said at last. "Are you sure?" asked the voice. Roy heard singing in the distance, strange and beautiful expressions of a simple melody. As the notes made their way to his ears, Roy had a sudden perception of this phenomena he was experiencing. What else could it be? He placed the religious frame from his childhood around it. According to Roy, later, God was there, in the strange winds. Evil was also there. This religious pattern was his only explanation for the invisible tides of joy, side by side with unspeakable oppressive fury. But whatever else these grand forces of the universe were about, Roy realized it had little to do with him. He felt that the visitation had to do with a technology, as if the very face of God jealously walked these aisles, dismantling an intrusive science of soul. Roy believed that he and Rachel were ringside, witnessing the bizarre, eternal conflict between creator and destroyer. A wave of religious exuberance swept over him, and he heard the chorus again. He realized now the music had been specifically placed there for his comfort. The lone melody was enjoined by a second and then a third voice. It was the most splendid song he had ever heard, and it erupted into a glorious confusion, filling all the spaces around him entirely. In the illogical sequence of dreams, Roy found himself in the midst of the X-frames, and he could see the people, the projections of life across the skeletal remains. He saw C. Walters, the little girl waving, and David, an old man with a glorious smile. The music was theirs, snatching him from a final border, from the terror of imponderable conflict, bearing him back on the streams of simple praise. In the illogical sequence of dreams, Mama Jack came to him, and though she said nothing with her lips, he felt the words inside. And she asked the same question, "Have you finished?" He wanted to believe he was past this question now, and didn't really want to reconsider it. He wanted music, not guilt. But the old woman wouldn't let it drop. "Have you finished?" she asked. "I haven't even started," was his eventual reply. The apparition stared at him for a long time. "What?" he asked, anxious to hear what she had to say. But this vision, this being who looked like Mama Jack, never said another word. She just watched him, until there came an explosion of understanding inside his head, though they were not her words. In fact, they didn't come attached to anyone's voice, not even his own. They were simple, disembodied, axiomatic, and fit perfectly onto the string of Roy's necklace for religion. Your purpose is not what you do, Roy. It is who you are. Above fate and circumstance, who you are is your only task. Over the others, you have no power. In that instant, Roy found himself back in the cave, staring at the ceiling. The X-frames were still brightly lit with the faces of the dead. "Rachel," he said, shaking her, "you've got to see this." He raised her to a sitting position. As she opened her eyes, a dumbfounded expression came over her face. In all vocal ranges, from bass to soprano, from child to adult, the voices of the dead intertwined, rising and falling, then rising again. There were moments when Roy could distinguish a line of melody, but it would merge into another line, become another song, haunting, beautiful emotions from these, the exuberant dead. Rachel and Roy could have listened forever, but there were other voices. The FBI team were entering the chamber now through one of the feeder shafts under the lodge, and with the arrival of our voices, one by one, the X-frames clicked out like candles, and the music that had so joyously filled the chamber dissolved into silence, never to be rekindled. As Rankin and Schultz disarmed the vault in the basement, the rest of us waited out by the cars. The security system at the lodge had otherwise proven rather ordinary, with run-of-the-mill motion detectors and alarms. A lot less to worry about than we had originally thought. Still, it was an anxious bit of business toward the end. There was enough C4 laid into the walls downstairs. Had someone forced the door or consecutively punched in the wrong code, the lodge would have been blown into low Earth orbit. I did not envy either Schultz or Rankin their job. When word finally came that they had opened the door, Newland cut off all electricity to the lodge. He then told me that they had found a stairway down into a mine shaft. "Don't know where it goes," he said, "but I have a feeling we may have found your lab, Mr. Nagy. Schultz and Rankin went first, followed by Agents Newland, Lockery, a couple of forensics people I hadn't met, and then me. And everyone else was strung out behind us in a line. At the bottom of the stairs, we entered a passage carved through solid rock. In places, it was barely wider than my shoulders, and wooden planks paved the floor, but of course it was still easy to stumble. When the man ahead of me stopped suddenly, I smacked into him pretty hard. He apologized, though, explaining that they had found something ahead. Given my keen sense of smell, I had a pretty good idea what it was. A body? I asked. He told me he didn't know. We started moving again, a little more slowly. Eventually we stepped into an underground chamber, the true size of which was masked by the darkness. It seemed to me a massive place. "Mr. Nagy," called Newland. I stepped to the front. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a woman's voice. It was Rachel. But the space was so large, the acoustic bounce made it impossible to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. On the monitors, we saw the most incredible thing. There he was, John Kennedy, motioning with his index finger and thumb the way a child would pretend to shoot a make-believe pistol. "I think he's remembering Dallas," said a distant male voice. "Is that right, sir? Are you remembering?" We saw the response. Kennedy's eyes closed on screen. He nodded. He then motioned to the side of his bed. Julian Lockery whispered to me that the second voice that we were hearing belonged to Roy Brooks. But where were they? When Roy spoke again, and then Rachel, we were able to get a fix on their approximate location. Newland ordered the others to stay back, as the three of us then headed into the shadows. "Rachel, where are you?" I called out. "Over here," she replied. When we walked up, Roy was facing into a dark corner. "He's there," said Roy, pointing out into vacant space. "What's he doing?" Newland asked. Roy described what he was seeing. "He's trying to tell us something in the bureau beside the bed, maybe. I'm not sure." On the opposite side of the cavern, where we had just been, the others watched the monitors in amazement. Able to see what Roy was seeing, there were varied opinions as to what Kennedy was trying to communicate. We heard an electronics crackle, sharp, like a static discharge. "What happened?" Newland asked. One of the agents told him that a monitor had just shut down. No sooner had these words been spoken, but another shut down, then another. Within 2 minutes, 15 of the 100 screens on the other side of the cavern had gone blank. Rachel repeated it to Roy. "We're losing power," she told him. Newland ordered his men to go back up to the pole and reset the power that had been shut down minutes before. "Mr. President," said Roy, "we may lose you, and I'm not the only one who wants to say goodbye." Instantly, the LA's hand came up. With obvious desperation, Kennedy pointed again to the side of the bed. Roy told him, "I don't understand. Is there any way you can tell me what you want?" Agent Schultz called out that maybe there was something in one of the drawers. It was a suggestion that made very little sense, though. "Mr. President," said Roy, "if you're trying to tell me about the drawer, if there's something you want us to see, it's on your side. You will have to open it." Kennedy shook his head. That wasn't his meaning. "What about the pictures?" someone called out from the other side, and the old man seemed to have heard. He nodded his head. Roy bent down, realizing for the first time that the small faces in the frames were Kennedy's children, John Jr. and Caroline. Those of us standing close by heard Roy say, "Maybe he wants to know about his kids." From the other side, we heard the sound again. Another monitor blinked out. "Does anyone know anything about the Kennedy children?" called Newland. Someone said that John Jr. was studying law. When told this, the old L.A. smiled, and he seemed pleased. "Does anyone know about the girl?" "Caroline's a lawyer too," someone called, "and she's married. I think he's a grandfather. Tell him that." "Mr. President, your daughter is married. We're not sure about this, but if she does have kids, you are a grandfather." The look in his face, in the old Kennedy face, reflected a lovely astonishment. Tears came to his eyes, but not just his. They came to ours, too. It was pure technology, or a wondrous, sacred illusion depending on your patterns. This L.A. was imagining a world he had never seen. It was impossible to watch and not be deeply touched by an old man weeping for his children, a ghost remembering a world he had never walked. "That's it," said Roy softly. "The kids." He unsnapped the chin strap and handed the visor to Rachel, who stared wordlessly at the resurrected face. She reached out to touch him, but of course there was nothing there. When she had said goodbye, she passed the visor to Newland. And then everyone standing near the monitors rushed over, pushing and shoving into a line, all of them anxious to say goodbye. The Kennedy L.A. listened attentively to each, nodding, smiling, blessing. One of the agents bragged that she was a Catholic and that she had always been proud of her faith on account of Kennedy had been such a great president. Curiously, many of them converted to Catholicism by the time it was their turn with the visor, and then someone made a point about being Irish, and the chamber filled as if by magic with Irishmen. Without a word, Rachel took my hand and led me into the X-frames. We were alone, still wiping tears, when she told me there was someone else I needed to see. She led me by the hand to David, and what would be the most astonishing experience of the day. Looking up at the fragmentary remains, Saul's questions about death raced through my soul. Exactly what would we be if we weren't stalked by this grim eventuality? Would there be bravery? Would there be honor? What was it about death's lantern that helped us see more clearly and love more deeply? What was it about death that hallowed remembrance and made us look upon strangers with blessing? Why was it that the whole human family had to be so completely defined by such a villain? "Mr. Sofer, I'm sorry that you weren't the one to find him," Rachel said, interrupting my meditation. "That's okay," I told her. "He was found. That's what counts. Who gets the credit really doesn't matter. If it had been even Danny Halfon, I don't think I would care." When I spoke his name, she looked up. "Mr. Sofer, there's something else." And then she broke into tears and crumbled into my arms, so filled with grief she could not speak. We walked back through the chamber, just the two of us. As we made our way up the stairs into the lodge, she began to tell me slowly everything that had happened, about the fight, about Peter, and that Danny was now dead. She said that Mia was still out there alone with Peter. I saw them before they saw me. It was snowing again, and Mia was sitting in the snow, leaning against a tree, her eyes closed. I don't think I've ever seen her so dejected. Peter was still kneeling next to the body. Softly I called out, and she looked up, surprised to see that I had gotten so close. She jumped up. We held each other tightly. The snow continued to fall. She felt so warm to me, and I sensed her body transmitting even through the layers of clothes. What do we do? She wanted to know. First, this. I took her face in my hand. Holding it firmly, I looked into her eyes. Avi, are you hurt? She asked, truly alarmed. What kind of question is that? Well, think about the kind of day this has been, she said, pointing over to Peter. Are you sure you're okay? Yes, and you are too, I told her. Peter's gone basically nuts, she told me. It's such a huge mess. No, Mia, hey, it's okay. What do you mean? She asked. We've got a dead person. You see that sleeping bag over there? I know, I told her, pulling her close. What are we going to do, Avi? Well, you're going to get into the car, and then you and Peter are going to check into a motel, and no one will ever know you've been here. And then what? Then call the embassy. They'll be expecting you, and someone will come and get you out. Promise. What about you? She asked. First, let's get Peter into the car. Peter's connection with reality had snapped completely. He was almost comatose. I knew he could hear me, but it was as if I were calling to him from a great distance. Slowly, he followed my instructions to stand. We led him through the snow all the way back to the Suburban, where I strapped him into the front seat. And when you call the embassy, I told her, make sure and tell them you want to speak with Mr. Naji. Can you remember that? It's code. Someone will come, help you with Peter, and then I'll see you back in Israel. What about him? Don't worry about Danny, I said. I grabbed her chin again, holding it until I had her focus. Avi, what are you doing? At this point, I leaned over and kissed her gently. I felt a shudder. Of course, it might have been just the cold, or then again it might have been me. When I drew back, she stared at me. Are you sure you haven't been shot? She asked. But I don't think she meant that. Go, I told her. Go now. She climbed into the Suburban and backed out onto the road, and then she was gone. The snow was coming down hard. I dragged poor Danny over one hill, then down the other side to a large rock. I placed him in such a way the falling snow would erase him completely within minutes. It was strange, being there alone with him. I told him I was sorry, and I was. In so many ways, he had been an outstanding young man, maybe a little too ambitious. I watched reverently as the falling snow covered him completely, blotting out all traces of blood, softly hiding his arms and chest in a billowing white robe. And those ears, those huge, imperfect ears, they were, oddly enough, the last things to disappear. And when there was nothing left, I told him goodbye and returned to the lodge. Never in all my life had my fortunes been so promising. It's been nearly a decade since these events. In the end, we succeeded in doing what we set out to do. 6 months after that snowy March day, the United States turned over the remains of David and Absalom to Israel. There were grand ceremonies in both Washington and Jerusalem. There was never much doubt in my mind that the remains would be reinterred somewhere and not placed on public display. And as I also expected, there was a heated debate on exactly where that burial place should be, one that lasted more than 6 years. During this time, the prince and the king were kept in a vault at Hebrew University. Eventually a plan was adopted, and in 1997, David and his son were reburied in no less a place than the foyer of the Knesset. A bronze statue was donated for the occasion by Great Britain, commemorating the famous father-son duo. It was based on the video Rachel took at the lodge during our brief encounter with the LAs. In the sculpture, you can see the two men standing back to back, looking over their shoulders, which is pretty much the view you'll see if the tape is ever released. Of course, they are wearing clothes. I was able to get back to Israel before my identity became an issue. Mia, Rachel, and Peter also returned safely. After reaching a few agreements, the journals were turned over to Mossad and Amman. Danny Halfon's body was also returned. His death was ruled accidental. Peter was committed to a psychiatric hospital for 3 years, and afterwards he returned to Russia. And what about Bentham's remains? Here's a question unanswered even today. A month after we got back to Israel, the FBI issued a warrant for Jeremy Bentham, suggesting, of course, he was still alive somewhere. This means he would have had to have been alive when Roy and Rachel discovered him. And Roy stands by his belief that the man was stone cold dead, but I honestly don't know. With regard to the technology, when the backup power went down and the machines went out, the software suffered a cataclysmic failure. In the mid-1990s, there was a rumor to the effect that some of the software had been recovered, but not all. To this day, I do not believe they've been able to fully resurrect even one LA, or if they have, it's been kept from the public. Of course, there's lingering speculation about what happened, and a lack of official explanation. On one side are those who see an apocalyptic string of supernatural events. On the other, people like me who see a supple technology executing routines of God. Those in the other camp argue that higher forces convened in the lab in a conflict over technology. And that's their explanation for everything from the mysterious envelopes sent to DEA to strange tongues and unexplained microatmospherics. Those of us who prefer more earthly explanations see little more than a contest between two rather unorthodox creative personality types. I strongly believe that Jeremy Bentham and Connor Borman White invented a set of technologies that will be duplicated sometime in the future. And when that day comes, we should not be surprised to see the metaphysics bleeding through again. On balance, I should add that both Rachel Levy and Roy Brooks are on the other side of this issue, and they fervently argue in behalf of the higher power explanation. Isn't it interesting how some debates are inevitably issues of faith? What follows is a letter sent to me by Roy Brooks. It explains his perspective. It was dated July 15th, 1993. It was addressed to Mr. Fauzi al-Naji, the Israeli Embassy, Washington, D.C. Mr. Naji, first of all, congratulations. Mia is a wonderful person. I wish the two of you all the best. Rachel tells me you're writing a book, and I'm planning to do the same if they'll let me. On the matter of John Kennedy, though it was reported that his remains were discovered inside the cavern in one of the X-frames, I want to add my observation to what Rachel has already told you. We thoroughly explored the cave looking for the president. He was not there. Your guess is as good as mine as to why this would be. They're keeping the truth of this matter from the public. I further believe the president's L.A., the one we saw briefly, had been constructed from DNA rotaries. Rachel and I experienced something beyond technology, as hard as this may be for you to accept. Since it doesn't quite fit what I know of conventional theology, I'm in contact with several ministers trying to see if there is a biblical explanation that makes sense. About the best thing I've heard so far is that we briefly saw through to the other side of the glass darkly. One thing I can say, though, there was good and evil in that place. And in the end, good seemed to have final ultimate power. I won't go into the other things discussed between you and Rachel, but the music was, if not heavenly, then otherworldly. I'll stick by that. And I don't think you should take the easy way out, explaining it all as computer-generated. There was something unusual, something really strange about the things we heard and the faces we saw. Bentham and White were obviously great programmers, but not that good. For me, the strangest thing of all involved my Mama Jack, my aunt. Rachel and I experienced what might be called a near-death experience. There are so many astonishing things that happened during these moments, but I won't take time to describe them all, for your book at least. I will say this much. While I was between life and death, Mama Jack appeared to me. She asked me a question which I'm still holding in confidence for the time being. And the most incredible part of all this, my Mama Jack passed away the morning we arrived at the lab. You can check this out if you don't believe it. You can contact the Melendez Funeral Home in Phoenix, Arizona, and they will be glad to provide you with more detail. But what's so astonishing, she appeared to me after death. From hundreds of miles away, she sought me out. How can all this be explained? Even though we're not sure what it proves, may I venture a couple of observations? First, it's not what you do. It's who you are. Second, and this may be the most important observation of all, second, there's more, a lot more, and it matters. Sincerely, Roy Brooks, Block C, Cell 42, Federal Corrections Unit, Springfield, Missouri.